So, welcome everybody. I do welcome you to another episode of the Composites United web seminar series, in this particular case with a title 3D printed salt cores for the manufacturing of complex hollow monolithic CFRP parts, presented by Simona Fehlmann, CEO and co-founder of Sallea, our latest member from Switzerland. And I do wish you an exciting presentation, and I hand over to you, Simona. Stage is yours.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for joining this Wednesday web seminar. Theo already introduced the title, so today we're going to talk about 3D printed salt cores that are used to manufacture complex, hollow, and ideally monolithic carbon composite parts. I will first start with a short look on the agenda. So first, I will introduce myself and Sallea. What are we doing? Where are we coming from? It's already written in the title. So we work with 3D printing. So I give you an introduction on indirect additive manufacturing, the value add of using sacrificial cores for composites manufacturing. Of course, there are other solutions available. I will also talk a bit about them. And then I want to show you some characterizations of our salt cores in-house. And towards the end, I will show you some case studies before there will be the outlook. Now, our journey at Sallea started at ETH. So I myself, I'm a material scientist. I did my bachelor's and master's here at ETH. And then during my master's thesis, met one of my co-founders at the time who did her PhD. And together we actually developed the technology to 3D print salt. Now, during that time, we thought, hey, it would be actually nice to see this on the market and to see where is actually the benefit of such a solution that we developed in research. And we actually applied for a so-called ETH Pioneer Fellowship, which is basically to transition from research to startup. And this we received in 2022, and then basically that led to the next step that we incorporated our company Sallea in 2023. And then if we focus a bit on the right-hand side, you can see that actually in research, we first were working on applications to using our salt printing technology for medtech applications, in particular for making bone implants. But then when moving over to the startup phase, we did a big broad market analysis. And we evaluated that cellular agriculture is the place to go. So this is basically in the food tech space to make cultivated meat. And this is also where we spent the last 2 years. However, we also realized that things are moving a bit too slow there, and therefore decided to pivot our company towards composite manufacturing, where we kind of also initially came from. And so this year, using our technology on using it for enabling composite manufacturing and making it more efficient and more effective. Now, also 2 years ago, we actually raised a first round of 2.2 million Swiss francs. That was our pre-seed round. And at the moment, we are a team of 5 full-time equivalents developing our salt core platform. To show you a picture of our team, so I just said it, we are 5, we are a small team, but we are combining the best from technology and business. So right now we are 2 co-founders, it's Anna and myself. So I'm the technical one, and Anna actually studied at the University of St. Gallen, so she has all of the business background and finance background and is driving that side of the business. We have 3 employees that are mainly technical and actually mostly working on further developing our products and our technology. So we are based in Zurich, at the moment still at ETH, but we are about to move out, but we stay in the broader region of Zurich. Now, I already mentioned a couple of times the 3D printing, and this is also where our roots come from. And when we initially started transitioning from research to the startup, we were also looking, hey, why is 3D printing not really being adopted in the industry for industrial manufacturing? And then we actually found this study from Jabil, which was conducting a study with a lot of industry players and was asking, hey, kind of what are the main limitations why you don't adopt 3D printing? And if you focus on the first answer, you can see that one of them, or the biggest issues, are actually material issues, and either it's cost or availability. And what I want to even point out here is that even over the years, this became more prevalent. And then they also asked, what challenge does your organization face with 3D printing for the ones that are already using it? And the first one is the cost of the pre and post processing. But already there, again, the second one is the limited selection of materials. And this is exactly why several companies and also research organizations started to circumventing the direct 3D printing, but looking at indirect additive manufacturing to circumvent these material limitations. And in the early days, actually the three-step indirect AM method was used. And I think it is still being used and also known in the composite industry, for example, for making metal cores that can be molten out, where usually you first 3D print a plastic material, here shown in purple. Then usually you cast kind of the silicon mold, or often it's silicone mold around it. You take out that first material that you printed before you can actually print, for example, the metal that you want to have, remove the silicon core to actually get your mold. So it's like a very lengthy and tedious process. And some examples for that are, for example, from academia, is when wax cores are used for metal casting, or in the industry, this is also used a lot in the jewelry industry. And now making the link to the composite industry, this is also still used quite a lot for the metal cores. Now, of course, over time, this has also evolved, and basically two-step indirect additive manufacturing has been established. And here, instead of having that extra step of first printing something to even making kind of the mold, you directly print the mold. But that means that it needs to be also water soluble. And this is exactly what we also do at Sallea. So I want to focus a bit and show you, explain you a bit more detail how we leverage that. So we also use this two-step indirect IM method to structure materials. And we do that only for materials that are either not directly printable, or that can be printed, but not at the resolution needed, or not with the mechanical properties that it needs for the end use. And we do this by using binder jetting as a 3D printing technology. For the ones that are not so familiar with additive manufacturing, it's a process where you have a powder bed. And this, in our case, is salt. And then basically you drop the binder onto the powder, and then you basically build your part layer by layer. And we do this to print our salt cores. And then when we move to the processing step in the center on here, so we have this salt core. And now I took an example, of course, from the composite industry, as this is our focus. Then this salt core can be used to drape around, for example, carbon textile or prepregs. It can be cured. And then in the end, the salt core, of course, is water soluble, can be leached out and results in a hollow part. And last but not least, on number 3, you see actually the actual part that we have made. And I will actually show in more detail later in the presentation how we did that. Now, of course, this technology can be used for composite materials, and mainly for making monolithic thermoset carbon parts. Yet there are also, our technology also can be used to shape other materials for other industries. One of them is to use it as sacrificial cores for injection molding. So for polymers, can also be thermoplastic composites, or also for making, for example, cell culture scaffolds, because there the issue is mostly that materials are also not directly printable. And I want to show you an actual example for the second potential application. It is, for example, also to still stay in the composite part, to making a sandwich panel, and to actually make superior cores for such a sandwich panel that is often used in the aerospace or in the space industry. And how this is done is basically the same way. So we still 3D print a template. In this case, that can be a lattice. It doesn't have to be. Then it can be injection molded with quite high pressures and temperatures. Then it's solidified, and then again, the salt core is washed out, resulting in such a lattice core. And in the center, you see actually an image of our core in the back and a silicone a salt core in the back, so the salt template, and in the front, basically the silicon core that, for example, can be used for such a sandwich panel. Now, however, since our company is focusing on thermoset composite materials, I will also stick with that application for the rest of this presentation. Now, since you're all experts in this industry, I'm sure you're all very well aware that the manufacturing of complex carbon composites still requires quite a lot of extensive manual labor. And typically, such parts are assembled, so they are manufactured in single parts that are then either assembled together or, for example, glued together. However, in the manufacturing, this leads to quite long lead times. Also, of course, the manufacturing costs are quite high, especially because there is usually more labor involved and complex tooling. And there is also the reduced mechanical strength because of discontinuous fibers and potential extra weight, for example, of screws to assemble the part together. And one of the solutions to circumvent that are sacrificial cores. Now, why are we using sacrificial cores? We see a huge benefit because single piece hollow structures can be manufactured in basically one step, two steps. And this is like a great benefit. This allows to cut the costs by more than 20%. And it also allows you to design the part with the best strength to weight ratio, so that you basically only have the material where you actually need it. And how we do it, I already explained. We use 3D printing, and the biggest benefit that this brings is that it allows for topology optimized structures. You have complete design freedom to make your part, and it also allows for fast design iterations at no additional cost, because there is no tooling that has to be waited for or paid for or adjusted to change your design. And because we are working with salt, it withstands quite high temperatures and pressures, but is still readily dissolvable in water. Now, I mentioned also a bit earlier on that, of course, there are other sacrificial mandrels on the market. And of course, there are way more than I'm showing on this slide, but I tried to group them a bit together. So I think what is quite standard used is, on one hand, polymer cores that are often, but not always, 3D printed, and usually also dissolve in water or in an aqua solution, and also wax and metal cores. Now, going a bit through this list, I think the ease of use of these cores is often not so easy. For example, for the wax and the metal, I think we saw it before. It's a very tedious process to even get to your core, and that is just very time consuming and a bit of a nasty process. Regarding shape complexity, of course, the polymers that are 3D printed have a similar advantage as we do. However, the ones that are molded are still quite limited in the shape. And last but not least, what is super important is the solubility or the removal of the core. For wax and metal, it has to be molten out. Often there is also something a bit remaining inside. It's a bit of a nasty process. This, of course, is more beautiful for the polymer ones that are water soluble, but take quite some long time. And of course, salt, you can imagine it when you cook pasta, salt dissolves quite fast. And looking at the price, also there, salt has quite an advantage compared to the other solutions. Now, summarizing this, in general, the current limitations of most of the alternatives available are that tooling is needed to even produce the core. The dissolution speed is usually or mostly longer than 24 hours, or for sure many hours, and there are long lead times to get the core. Now, the benefit with our solution is that it doesn't require tooling because we 3D print it. Because it's based on salt, it dissolves quite quickly. And an additional benefit from using salt as a base material for the core is that there are no toxic residues or special waste that one has to take care of when handling these cores. Now, of course, it doesn't come from nowhere that we knew how to or in which direction we should develop our course. We conducted a lot of customer calls, interviews to figure out, hey, what is actually the pain point and what is needed. And this basically also set the baseline for the requirements of the development of our salt core or salt core platform. And on the next two slides, I want to show you a few characterization data that we have conducted on our course before further trying or using it to manufacture actual carbon composite parts with it. Now, the one I want to start with is actually the mechanical stability. So processes or to make carbon parts, usually that requires that the salt cores are stable up to several bars. If you're talking about, let's say, standard RTM or autoclaving processes for thermoset materials. So we did conduct some compression tests on our end with our samples. For that, we used cylindrical samples with the same diameter and height. And here on the slide, you just see an example of 3 samples that we have tested recently. And you can see that, of course, the material is a brittle material, and it has a compressive stress of around 2 megapascal. And we also took out the compressive modulus from these graphs, and it's roughly 264 megapascals. Of course, the standard deviation is a bit larger. As you can see, there is one sample that is a bit out of line compared to the others. Additional measurements and actually testing the core in action showed that our cores can withstand pressures beyond 50 bars. It's not directly represented in this graph, but I just wanted to add it here because I find it quite amazing how much pressure salt cores can withstand. Secondly, surface roughness. This is always a topic both in 3D printing, but also in composite manufacturing. And it's something that we have also been looking at, and it's actually something that we are still working on and improving. Overall, we did some profilometry measurements, and this indicated that we have roughly surface roughness of an RA value of 20 microns, which is in line with kind of the binder jetting process. Of course, this is something that we are working on to improving and to actually lowering down. Now, what you see on the graph is just one example of a sample that we tested. So basically, for the ones that are not familiar with the measuring method, it's basically you have a needle on the surface, and basically you draw it over the surface, and then basically it measures the displacement over the kind of the distance from A to B. Now, what is also very important to be looking at, especially for our customers, is the geometrical accuracy and the tolerances. And for that, at the moment, we are working with optical 3D scanning. And what we have done is that we compared these printed salt cores with the CAD file. And what you can actually see on the images that I show on top of the graph, it's basically how it looks there. You see in green, it fits very well to the CAD, and where it's a bit red, it's a bit slightly different than the CAD file. And but you can see overall that kind of the means offset from the CAD file is roughly in the range lower than 0.3 millimeters. Of course, the standard deviation here is a bit bigger, but I would say on average it is below 0.3 millimeters. Now, what is still to be done here is that we further compare different such salt core samples with each other to know how reproducible our process really is. But from what we have seen so far, it is actually quite reproducible from the 3D printing aspects. I see there is still the wrong title. I'm sorry for that. So here it's not about the surface roughness, but actually about the water dissolution and the dissolution time. And for that, actually, I brought a video because I think a video or an image tells more than 1,000 words. So here we actually manufactured 2 carbon parts, small ones, and we then let them sit in the water for some time. And then in the video, you can see that part has a very small opening to remove the core, and then the next one has a bigger opening, and it actually comes out quite nicely, and over time it would actually even dissolve further in water. To, in general, speed up the process in dissolving the salt core is actually by adding flow. This always helps. The water can also be heated to, for example, 60 degrees. That speeds up the process as well. And if available, also ultrasonication can even improve that a bit further. Now, we have also, I showed you how we manufactured our salt cores. I also showed you how or some of the characterization we have done on our salt core. And the next step now is how our salt cores are used to actually manufacture the carbon part. And of course, we do that with customers, but I first want to show you an example that we did in-house. So we wanted to do a monolithic bracket with our salt core. And as we are the materials experts, but with a focus on making the cores, unfortunately, we do not have all the fancy equipment like autoclaves or RTM machines in-house. So we just stuck with simple vacuum bagging and curing our part in the oven to make basically the lightest and strongest bracket with our salt cores. And what we did is, so this salt core has been 3D printed that you see. Wait, I will turn on the laser. So here you see one of our 3D printed cores. Then basically we used the standard process to lay up the prepregs on top of our cores. And we did actually two layers of that before we would wrap it in the foil and prepare it actually for the vacuum bag. Pull the vacuum out of it, cure it in the oven at 120 degrees for a few hours to cure the epoxy. And then we were removing the part from the vacuum bag. And as you can see here, this part didn't have any hole, and we created that on purpose because we also wanted to see how machinable is the carbon part after it is cured. Once for the carbon, but second also for the core that is still inside. And what we did is actually we were drilling the washout channels into the core. Now we did it all manual, so our engineers did this all manual. So you can see we just put some reinforcement around and to drill in to make sure that we do not have too many fibers that are kind of breaking out from where we drill in. And then basically we created 3 holes, one here, here, and here on the lower end, and then basically let it sit in the water. The dissolution took roughly, I think, 1 or 2 hours for that part when it was just being left in the water. And then here you basically see then the resulting part. I know it's a bit hard to see, but it's really hollow inside and it's super light. Maybe here you see it a bit better so that there is really nothing being left inside. And what this proved us is that we can achieve monolithic lightweight bracket parts with our salt cores. We also learned or knew that our salt cores are compatible with the vacuum bagging. Also that it's temperature stable beyond 120 degrees was proven, and that also machining is still possible when the core is still inside. And I think one of the most important things that it still dissolves quite quickly, in this case, still below 2 hours. Now, sorry, yeah. Now, we did this case internally, but what is actually even more important is that we also work with companies that are actually producing carbon composite parts, and to get real feedback so we can further improve our technology and make sure it is easy and easy to use. One of these projects was with BioNTech. Please bear with me. I know there is a lot of information, but I tried to put in as many pictures as possible to make it visible and make you understand what can be done with our technology. So here, in the first place, thanks a lot to BioNTech for doing this project with us. It's actually still ongoing. So here, the challenge that they had is that they wanted to create a hollow, very lightweight part for an industrial machinery application. And the main challenge that they had is that they wanted to decrease the post-processing time to the solution that they were using now. And the state of the art of this project is that they are using a machined foam. And this foam is basically partially left in the part in the end, and where possible, where there are openings, it was basically machined out after curing it. And of course, this is quite time consuming. Here on the bottom, you see images of the examples of these foam cores. So in this project, we as Sallea, we printed our salt cores. So here you see an example. I'm sorry I didn't have a picture of kind of this small part, but it basically looks similar to this one. So this one was taken, and then at BioNTech, they were basically wrapping around their textiles around the core, and then put it into their mold. So they were using the RTM process to do it. Here you see two examples. So we did two cores at the same time. Then basically the mold was being closed and the resin was infused. The process was done at 90 degrees Celsius, and 2 to 3 bars were used. And then after a few hours, the part could be removed from the mold. And this here, you see the resulting part. Of course, the resin is a bit all around, so it's hard to see the core, but it's mainly here inside, and here is kind of the second part of the core. Now, an opening has been made to wash out the core. And this is basically how it looked in the end. So we managed to remove the bigger portion or most of the core. And here is even a zoom in of the core inside. So what was really good is we could greatly remove the core. However, you see that there is still some of the solder of the core left on the surface. However, that can also be machined away if needed. It showed that we could have a complete removal of the core. Also, BioNTech managed to reduce the post-processing time by 15%. And through that, also less labor was used, and there it could be reduced by 6%, which I think is a really good achievement. Next steps in these projects are that we improve our surface finish on the core, so to have even less remainder on the carbon part, also to increase the process stability. And of course, if you look at this part, it has not been machined yet, so it still needs to be machined to actually become the final part. So it has been very successful so far, and I'm really looking forward to what's to come in the next few weeks out of that project. Now, we did a second project with a university team. So it was with the REN team Stuttgart, and they are basically building a Formula student car to go to several races this summer. And they have the biggest challenge that they need to make lightweight air ducts because they wanted to improve the aerodynamics of the race car. And they wanted to identify also core materials that are compatible with autoclave processing. And the way they are doing these parts at the moment is they tried to do it with a do-it-yourself salt paste, as it is suggested here. And as you can imagine, it actually failed because it basically couldn't retain its shape, but also even because it couldn't retain its shape, I think there was even some corrosion in the autoclave, which was really not great. And this is why they were really excited about our salt core technology. And here you see an example of a core that we produced for them. So again, here this is 3D printed. And then they used it to do a wet layup and an autoclave process that was also at 120 degrees, 3 to 7 bars. They managed to make a part that is actually quite thin. And you can see here, so it's kind of this part that's where the core was in. They made kind of small openings and managed to get out the full core out for this part. Here you see even the whole part a bit zoomed out. And this part is actually part of their race car that they are using this summer. I think the biggest learning, or what they were mostly excited about, is that they managed to achieve a 52% weight reduction of the air ducts compared to before. It was also possible to remove the core fully. And they let us also quote them. So they said the core is easy to laminate and requires no effort in removal. So with them, the next steps are that we actually produce additional cores for other parts for the race car. And then they will actually go to some races in Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and actually even also the Czech Republic. So also a very successful project. Now, with these two use cases, you saw a bit where we stand with our technology as a company, what it can be used for. To summarize, I created this slide to give you an overview, where do we actually stand today. So again, our salt cores are at the moment tailored to thermoset composites, and they are compatible with RTM, hand layup, vacuum bagging, filament winding, and autoclaving. They withstand temperatures up to roughly 150 degrees Celsius, can withstand pressures beyond 50 bar. And at the moment, the tolerances are below 0.5 millimeters. Our main, let's say, limitations and points we are working on is, on one hand, the part size. So at the moment, we are working with an R&D printer and therefore are quite limited in the part size we can do. However, we are about to purchase a bigger printer to actually go to much bigger sizes. Second is the surface. I think you saw it from the case studies. We saw that there is still some remaining and it's a bit still rough. So the idea is to improve on the surface because we actually use a coating to make that even smoother. And last but not least, our production capacity, also related to 3D printer, at the moment is roughly 10 to 15 parts per week. In Q1 next year, that will be scaled significantly with our new printing machine that we were purchasing at the moment. To end the presentation, of course, there is also a call for action for you. So it was very nice that you all attended this. And so if this inspired you and you have any parts that you currently cannot produce as a monolith, please reach out. Also, if you have parts that you would like to manufacture, but you cannot do it, also please reach out. So we are really looking for these parts that are tricky to manufacture, because we believe that we have a benefit for you, not just in the manufacturing side, but also from the cost side. And last but not least, so we are also open for production projects for smaller volumes for early next year. Because we do have this production capacity with this new printer we are purchasing at the moment. Now, with that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I'm really happy to get all of your questions if there are any that you have.